Hello again, this is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and today I want to answer one of the questions I am asked most frequently by my students, and that is, how do I come up with ideas when I'm writing the TOEFL Independent Essay? Now, before I give you some specific advice, I do need to mention that the Independent Essay has both an easy part and a hard part. Now, the easy part is writing your main argument. That's the thesis that goes in the introduction of your essay. That's easy because all you have to do is make a choice. Like sometimes you get the agree-disagree style question, and you just have to choose whether you agree or disagree with the given statement. Sometimes you get the preference style question, and you just have to choose a preference. Lastly, sometimes you get the multiple choice style question, and you just have to choose one of the options. So that's easy, just make a choice. The hard part, however, is supporting that choice and coming up with supporting arguments that you can use in your two body paragraphs. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. So, when it comes to supporting your main argument, I want you to consider the main argument in terms of the four most important aspects of everyone's life. I want you to consider the effects of your choice on these four aspects. And what are these four aspects of life? Well, they're on the screen now, and I'll summarize them very quickly. First off, you've got your work, by which I mean your job and your money. So ask yourself, how does my choice affect my work? Next up, you've got your health, by which I mean both your physical and your mental health. Next, you've got learning, which is what you do at school and university. And lastly, you've got family, by which I mean relationships with your loved ones, including your close friends. In my experience, if you consider your main argument from all four of these perspectives, you should have a much easier time coming up with ideas that you can use in your body paragraphs. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at a few samples. First up is an agree-disagree style question. It goes like this. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Overall, the widespread use of the internet has a mostly positive effect on life in today's world. Now, my choice is yes, I agree with that. So I have to consider my choice from each of these four perspectives when I write my body paragraphs. So first of all, I considered it from the perspective of work, and I came up with this. First of all, the internet contains a lot of job websites, which people can use to start careers. That sentence right there could be the first sentence of your first body paragraph. But next up, I considered it from the perspective of health, and I came up with another sentence I could begin that body paragraph with. It goes like this. First of all, we can use the internet to quickly contact a doctor, which means we can receive treatment during emergencies. But then I considered it from the perspective of learning, and I came up with this. Secondly, there are a lot of online universities these days, which makes it possible to take classes and have a career at the same time. That could be the beginning of my second body paragraph. But I also considered it from the perspective of family, and I came up with, secondly, the internet makes it easy to communicate with our loved ones, even if we are far from them, which reduces our loneliness. So, as you can see, I only need to write two body paragraphs, but I've got four possible arguments I can use. And coming up with these arguments was easy because I considered it from the perspective of work, health, learning, and family. These four options should work most of the time. I'll show you some more examples in just a minute, but first I want to talk about a technique I use when writing these sentences. Notice how each of the sentences begins with a descriptive part. Like right here, I wrote, the internet contains a lot of job websites. And then after the descriptive part, I mentioned the specific effect, which people can use to start careers. Likewise, down here, I start with the descriptive part. We can use the internet to quickly contact a doctor. And then I mention the effect on our life, which means we can receive treatment during emergencies. I did the same thing in the last two sentences, but I won't read them here. This technique is very useful because it makes your grammar a bit more sophisticated. It makes your topic sentence more descriptive and specific, and it makes it easier to write a personal example, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. Now, the grammar nerds in the audience will notice that I used a subordinating conjunction to separate it each time. That's not mandatory, but it is a good technique. Later in the video, you'll see sometimes I used a coordinating conjunction, sometimes I just used a different technique altogether. But if you want to keep it easy, I think using the subordinating conjunction which to separate the description from the effect is probably a good idea. All right, let's take a look at a few more examples that illustrate how we can use these four aspects of life. Next up, I have a multiple choice style question. Neighbors are the people who live near us. In your opinion, what type of neighbor is the best to have? My choice, someone who is quiet. So that's going to become the thesis of my essay. But how am I going to support that in the body paragraphs? Well, first of all, I considered my choice from the perspective of work. And I came up with, first of all, if our neighbors are quiet, we can rest and relax after we get home from work, which increases our productivity. Likewise, I considered it from the perspective of health, and I got, first of all, if our neighbors are quiet, our life will be more peaceful, which will improve our mental health. I could begin my first body paragraph by using either of those, and they would both be excellent. Next, I considered it from the perspective of learning, and I wrote, secondly, if our neighbors are quiet, it is easier for us to study and do homework in our free time, which means we will get higher scores on our tests. Now, I considered it from the perspective of family, and I didn't come up with anything specifically, but that's okay, because I only need two reasons, and I've got three. But if you guys have any ideas about family, please leave a comment down below, and I'll tell you what I think about it. Here's another multiple choice question. Imagine you could improve the town where you live by changing one important thing about it. Which of the following would you choose to do? My choice is to build additional parks. I came up with a reason based on my health. I came up with a reason based on my learning. I came up with a reason based on my family. I started with a descriptive part and I ended with listing the effect. I did the same thing in all three of them. I didn't come up with anything about work, but that's okay because again, I only need two reasons. So I want to emphasize, you're not always going to find a reason related to all four of them, but you should be able to get a reason related to two or three of them, and that's all you need. I think this is the last example. It's a preference style question. Some people prefer to live in a small town, others prefer to live in a big city. Which place would you prefer to live in? My choice was that I prefer to live in a large city. And I came up with a reason related to work, which is that there's lots of companies there and it greatly increases my chance of finding a job. I came up with a perspective about health, perspective related to learning, and a perspective related to family. I'm not going to read them here, but you can pause the video and check them out on your own. But again, work, health, learning, family. I swear it works almost every time. All right, so that's how you come up with an argument to support your main thesis. But if you've seen my videos about the independent essay, you know that most of the body paragraph is made up of a personal example. Now, how do I come up with a quick personal example for each body paragraph? Well, I'll give you a few tips. Take a look at this. We're going back to the first question about the internet, and I've chosen to write a body paragraph about how the internet makes it easy to communicate with our loved ones, even if we are far from them, which reduces our loneliness. So what kind of personal example can I write about that? Well, My advice to students is to keep it simple, keep it concise, keep it direct. Don't get too fancy with your ideas. Just tell a story about how you were away from your loved ones, how you used the internet to communicate with them, and how your loneliness was reduced. That's all you got to do. So here's my notes. This isn't a paragraph, this is just the notes I'm using to put together my story. About 10 years ago, I moved away from my family to work in Burkina Faso. I lived all alone in a small village and I had no friends. I felt lonely. I missed my mother a lot. Everyone in the village had internet access thanks to modern technology. I could call my mother every day and even chat using video technology. In time, my loneliness went away and I became happy again. This would not have been possible without widespread use of the internet. So, that's it. It's just a literal story from my imagination about how I use the internet to communicate with my family and reduce my loneliness. A few general kind of tips for writing these stories. I always recommend you start by telling me when it takes place. So you can write about 10 years ago, about 5 years ago, or when I was a small child. Just begin by setting the stage by telling me when it took place. And if you're kind of running out of ideas, it's always useful to end it with a conditional sentence. So you're saying, this would not have been possible without the internet. So it's saying that this positive effect depended on the thing that I chose in my thesis. You can usually end the body paragraphs that way. Let's take a look at another example. This is the one about the small town. And my choice was that I like to live in a big town. And the topic sentence I went with is, secondly, cities contain a lot of educational facilities like libraries and museums, and these increase our academic potential. And I simply told a little story about how I lived with my family in a city. I went to libraries and museums, and this increased the academic potential of my daughter. That's all I had to do. I started it, by the way, by saying it was 10 years ago. And then I said, this would not have happened if I had lived in a small town. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. So this video, to repeat, should have shown you how to come up with arguments to support your main thesis. And it should have given you a few general tips on how to write personal examples. If you have any questions about what you've seen, just leave a comment down below, or visit me at TOEFLresources.com or email me using the address on the screen. I always love to hear from you guys, no matter how you choose to contact me, and I promise I will get back to you as quickly as I can. I think that's all for today, but I encourage you to subscribe to the channel or just pop by next week for a new video. I will see you then. Take care, guys, and goodbye.